basically everybody else except for him is an actor. And the whole thing is sort of a farce. The world doesn't even exist as he understood it. And I'm not even trying to get deeply philosophical or on some abstract level. I'm saying literally, what really goes on in the world is sort of different than we understand. And we all create our own little reality. And we go with that. I want to show you a book I just picked up. It's by a man who's a great American. He played a terrific role in our country's recent history. He worked for a very strong and powerful and really terrific president, and they did some really, really great things for our country. His name is Karl Rove. The book is called Courage and Consequence: My Life as a Conservative in the Fight. And I'm reading this book, and I'm planning to write something about it, and it's quite extraordinary because as I read this, I thought, well, you know, actually he turns out to be a pretty good guy. I didn't realize, you know, and all of these things really were not the way I understood them at all. And I went on Amazon, and you see these reader reviews. The top one, that's what this fellow says. He says, you know, I had no idea really what a good guy he was. This book has changed my perception of this. And by the way, of course, he's on every show. Left, right, and center. He's on all the shows. Did you see him on Stephen Colbert Report? I don't know if he's been on with Jon Stewart yet, but I'm sure he will be. He gets on all the shows. He was on Fresh Air with Terry Gross. All your favorite shows he was on, and everybody treats him, you know, quite respectfully, and it's a good laugh and all. And the interesting thing, of course, is that the Peter Dale Scotts, you know, can't get on the shows. I'm a moderately mainstream figure, but I've got a book that's so explosive, I have trouble getting on the shows. There's some other very, very interesting books out now, extremely well documented, that change our understanding of recent American history completely. You may not have heard of any of these books. And one of the reasons is they can't get on the shows. They can't even, a lot of them can't even get on places like KPFA for that matter. It's very, very difficult. And if there's time, I'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Excellent.
Basically, we have a kind of a blind spot about the fact that, you know, we talk about, we go to a shopping at a store called Banana Republic, and it's kind of funny, and then we kind of joke about, you know, countries we call banana republics. But when I talk to people who are from those countries who live here, they say, you know, you're living a bit of an illusion. You're only not in a banana republic if you think you're not in a banana republic. And because our lives tend to be so comfortable, and because nobody cares that we're talking about what we're talking about here, we don't really rate, and so nobody's going to come in here and start busting heads. They don't need to do it because, look, what population does Berkeley have? And we've got really a very modest turnout here. I mean, that tells you something. So in any case, I would argue that we don't see the role of the elites and really a kind of an oligarchy in our country. We really can't understand it. And I don't mean this, again, in an abstract way. In Family of Secrets, what I did was back in 2003, I was living in the former Yugoslavia, training journalists there in investigative reporting, and they began the preparations. It was very clear they were going to war in Iraq. And it was very clear to me that this was trumped up. I wrote some pieces in various publications about that at the time. And then when the war began, when you lived anywhere in Europe, the reaction was completely different. People were just mortified, and they said, what happened to the United States? What happened to your country? We all, you know, we loved the United States. We looked up to the United States. And I was sitting there in Belgrade, and I had all my TV channels. I had Fox and CNN, and then I had the BBC, and then I had these Euro News and these other channels, and they were doing completely different reports. Fox was, the war was like a video game, and it was really almost fun. CNN, it was a little more subtle than that. You know, BBC was more trouble. Then the continental shows were much more trouble than that. And I thought, boy, you know, there's really something going on here. Something has really fundamentally changed in America. Even whatever you might have considered the problems before, they were that much multiplied under Bush. And so when I got back to the States in 2004, I decided I'm going to ask a very simple question and see if there's not any more profound answers. And that question was, how did George W. Bush, of all people, become the President of the United States? Why did so much money, and you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars from some very, very smart people, were invested in this man, not in a Bob Dole Republican, you know, not in a Lamar Alexander Republican. They went for this fellow. who had so little to recommend him in any possible way, even as an individual. It was not somebody that most people would have wanted to, date their daughter, or God forbid, or anything like that. But I mean, to be president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world. And I just thought, I just wonder if there isn't more to his rise and to what he has done, what he has accomplished in really transforming the United States and the world. And so I began traveling around the United States, asking questions and talking to people and reading and digging. And for the first 2 or 3 years, I found almost nothing. And then suddenly something clicked, and I started looking at some other things, and I kind of went down a rabbit's hole. And we don't have enough time here for me to go into too many of the revelations. Would you give me like a 5-minute warning?
Go, man, go.
Okay. In any case, what happened was this. In 2004, George W. Bush was running for re-election. We already knew that there was no reason to be in Iraq. Okay? He was running for re-election, and it looked like he might win. And I thought, well, I can't quite square this, because seemingly all Americans should be troubled to be in a war that turns out to have been sold under false pretenses. And then I looked at it, I said, now why is it that he's likely to be reelected? Well, basically a couple of things happened. Number one, he was in trouble because a man named John Kerry was running, and John Kerry, unlike Bush, was a war hero, and also from a war that Kerry opposed and Bush supported, yet Bush seemingly disappeared. Bush seemingly disappeared during his war service during Vietnam. And I did quite a bit of research for that and did some articles for The Nation about it, and discovered rather conclusively that in fact he literally stopped serving with 1/3 of his military service left to perform, and he just disappeared. And I thought, well, how could you be president of the United States and start an elective war and be on your way to re-election and have disappeared yourself during the Vietnam War, and nobody seems to care about this? And then he had this opponent, John Kerry, who was something of an opposite there. And I thought, boy, he's really sunk. Well, we know what happened. Of course, John Kerry got hit by the Swift Boat veterans and their ads questioning his record. And then all the journalists who were looking at Bush's record, suddenly CBS News goes with this report, remember that? Dan Rather with those documents about Bush's service, and suddenly all these bloggers are out there saying these are bogus documents, and the next thing we know, the invincible Dan Rather is destroyed, and he's out. These were very serious things going on, folks. These were quite consequential, and they were not accidents. And what they were part of is really what Family of Secrets addresses. That is the secret history, and it is the use by elites and by parts of the oligarchy, essentially, of parts of the official government apparatus, particularly the intelligence apparatus, in order to advance their own interests and repeatedly to thwart democracy itself. I discovered parts of this when I was looking at George W. Bush and trying to figure out how he had managed to paper over his disappearance from the military. And I began looking at his father. His father was the head of the Republican Party since the beginning of '73, and during the period when his son had disappeared from military service. And I thought, what did the father do about this? Surely he would have known whether his son was serving or not, and would have been upset to learn that the son was essentially AWOL. What I found was that the father doesn't show up in any books. All the books I looked at about the son, about Vietnam, about the father's presidency, there's nothing about this period. And I thought, well, George H.W. Bush, I mean, who was he? He was in the White House for 12 years. For 12 years, and I thought, I don't understand how the son became president, but frankly, I don't even understand how the father became president. And this was the secret, folks, was that I began looking at the father. And it is in the father, more than half of Family of Secrets is about the secret life of our president, George H.W. Bush. His secret life. And I'll just give you a few little details here, and then you can read the rest for yourself. But basically, what I discovered was that when he was named CIA director in 1976 under Gerald Ford, at the height of congressional inquiries into illegalities and wrongdoing by the CIA, if you go back and you read the newspapers, they all sort of scratch their heads. And they say, can't quite figure out why this guy, he's not very strong, he doesn't seem that capable, that articulate, he has no background in intelligence, he was only in the House of Representatives very briefly. They couldn't quite figure out why he was being named CIA director, but they kind of just said, well, whatever. And they went on. And what I discovered was that there was a reason he was appointed to run the CIA. The reason